Welcome everybody. Good to see a nice turnout today on our first weekend of the Saturday seminar series. As I had mentioned earlier, we're going to continue this through the rest of the month, doing 2 seminars each Saturday. First one at 9, take a short break. Second one at 11. Get done and get out of here by the time the cool burns off so you can start getting your boats ready for the summer. As you can see, my name is Kish. I'm with Larsen Marine. I see some new faces out there and I see some repeat faces out there. It's the same seminar I've done for years, but people always call me throughout the year and ask more questions, so I just continue doing it. A lot of people use it as a reminder. I've been with Larsen Marine. I'm on my 22nd year now. Before this, I was in the United States Navy, where I got a retirement from there, working on diesel engines. And prior to that, I grew up over in Sandusky, Ohio, Catawba, Port Clinton area, boating on Lake Erie my whole life. So I have a lot of experience. My dad was a charter boat captain, and I always took care of his engines there. So today's seminar is on basic diesel engine maintenance in the Great Lakes region. It's not just, so kind of the schedule I follow isn't just diesel engines. That's kind of the way it's directed because that's what most of those have. However, we do have some customers out there with atomic 4 gas engines, and so you would want to follow kind of the same procedures for that as well. So we're going to go through the seminar. If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll get to you. I'll answer your question to the best of my ability. If I don't know the answer, I'll take your email and I make sure I get it back to you. In addition, I'll repeat your question because you might ask something softly and folks in the back won't be able to hear it. I just want them to know what I'm answering on. So with that, before we get started, how many power boaters we got? Don't everybody look and laugh. Sometimes they get a couple. No, I'm just teasing. Okay. How many Yanmar diesels? A lot of Yanmar. Westerbeek, Volvo Penta, Beta, couple. Perkins? No? Good, those are really hard to work on. Universals? Okay. A lot of people don't know this, but so if you get a chance, you should write down your engine model number and your serial number and keep it in a safe place. Not just, if you store here at Larsen Marine, we usually have that information for you and can pull it up for you, but it's good to have that kind of stuff with you if you're going out and you need to get filters or antifreeze or specific engine parts. A lot of people don't realize this, but the marine diesel engines are kind of color-coded. I don't know that this was ever by design, but in all my years of doing this, I've discovered if it's blue or silver, it's usually a Perkins. If it's gray like this, it's a Yanmar. Westerbeek and Betas are red. Volvo Penta is green. Universal is usually either sometimes a silver color, a blue or silver color, or a gold color. So you may walk into a parts store and somebody may say, what engine do you have? I don't know. So then they'll say, well, do you know what color it is? That's the reason why, because you can kind of get to where you need to be by telling that. So, with that said, these are just the specific components of a diesel engine. And it's a lot similar on the gas engines too, as you were asking about. The only difference is on a diesel engine, you have air intake. On all engines, you have air intake. And then the piston's coming up, squeezing the air together. It creates turbulence, which creates heat. And then just prior to top dead center, fuel shoots in, and it hits the, around the piston in a high pressure atomization. And then that heat that's generated and that fuel going in causes an explosion within the cylinder. And then the exhaust valve opens and the extra gases blow out. The only difference with the gas engines are the tolerances aren't as tight and they don't create as much heat as a diesel engine does. So they have a spark plug, like in most of your cars, that actually puts a spark in prior to top dead center so that explosion will happen. That said, I got a neat little slide here so you can see how everything goes. And it starts with the, right there, it sucks air in, the fuel injection. Sorry, I said it backwards right there, air intake. The way I've always described diesels, and when I used to teach at the base, I'll wait till it comes around and I'll show you. So right here, you're sucking air in. Suck, squeeze, that's the compression, pop is the explosion, and blow is the exhaust going back out. Very simple. To me, much easier to work on than a gas engine. You don't have as many electronics that you have to worry about. But nonetheless, that's the differences between the two of them. So we're going to start with our fuel systems. Okay, major components in the fuel system is your tank, and then, I didn't bring my pointer out. It's okay. So you have your tank, and it comes down. What it doesn't show in here, this is an old slide and I left it in there so that I could let everybody know. Between your tank and your lift pump, which can either be mechanical like this one is, or it can be electric like on a Westerbeek engine, there should be a fuel filter between here and here. We like to call them water separating fuel filters. That takes out some particulate matter that may be coming from the tank, but it'll also take out any water that may have been suspended within the fuel. Then it goes through your lift pump, and then it goes through a final or a secondary fuel filter, which is a much smaller micron filter. And then from there, it'll go down to the injection pump. The injection pump creates a high pressure and sends the fuel through the lines to the injectors. And then this pump is timed so that as you saw how that engine was moving and in cycle like it was, so it's timed so that fuel shoots into each cylinder just prior to top dead center. What I mean by that is when that piston's coming up, when it gets all the way up as high as it can move before it starts going back down, that's top dead center. So just prior to that, with that heat in there and turbulating, the fuel shoots in, hits the piston, and forces it back down. It's a continuous cycle, and it's timed so your engine will keep running. You take either the fuel or the air or the combustion away, your engine's not going to run. So those are your three major components that's going to help that diesel run. Now, fuel filters, when you're on the boat, different boat manufacturers put them at different locations. So it's not going to be the same on every boat. It can go just about anywhere. So you have the one on the boat. What I like to do is take a baggie. When you're down on your boat, take a baggie and take a few rags and put it inside the baggie. Do them like this. And then we take our wrenches or whatever tools we're using and we start loosening that filter. I usually like to wrap this around it because for those of you who have done it yourself, you know that they don't put it in front of you like this engine sitting in front of me. You're usually working through a component or a compartment that's very, very small. And you have to twist your elbows 3 different directions to get in there. So if that happens, then I can get this up, I can loosen the filter, then I get this baggie up around it, and I can grab the filter and spin it. The whole reason behind this is, who wants a diesel smell on their boat? If you've had it, you know it's hard to get out of it, and it's hard to clean up. So it's just a good way to keep things clean as you're moving along on your boat and changing your filters. The same with your fuel filter on your engine. This one's even more difficult because this is in a really bad location to get to. It's nice and easy right here, and we can get it around this. But now we're working through an opening that's only this big, so it's hard to get in there. So my suggestion is you use something similar to this. Some people will take an oil jug and cut it off and put that around it. There's several different ways you can do it, but not only do we want to maintain our diesel engine, but we want to keep our boat clean and free of all those fuels that you don't need to. Now, you saw in the beginning it said basic diesel maintenance in the Great Lakes. The reason I do that, all of your manuals are written with the concept that your boat is going to be in the water 24/7, 365 days a year. You don't realize it. You go out on the lake on a nice day and you see a ton of boats and you think, wow, there's a lot of boats out here. We are a very small amount of boats compared to boats that are around the world and in the oceans. So when they write the standards are written for boats that are always in the water. And so the reason I do my seminar on boating in the Great Lakes is because we get April to October, if we're lucky, for boating. So the intervals at which we recommend changing filters is based on that, because your boat's in the water, then it's out of the water. When it's out of the water, you got cold air. When you got cold air, and then it warms up, you get condensation. So that's why I kind of direct the seminar towards that. That said, we recommend that you change your fuel filters once a year in the fall or every 100 hours. So I asked the question at the beginning about power boaters and sailboaters. That's the reason why I need to know how to direct this. Sailboaters, unfortunately, like to start their engine, leave the harbor, turn their engine off, and put their sails up. Your diesel engine doesn't like it when you do that. It likes to get hot once in a while. It needs to run efficiently in the way it's supposed to. But with that said, that's the recommendation on the filters. Now, you can buy, you can buy generic filters. There's lots of filters that will work, but my recommendation is you buy the OEM filter that's designed for the engine, especially if you're in warranty. If your boat is in warranty and you use a filter that was not bought from a dealer for the manufacturer of that engine, they will not cover your warranty. I can tell you the going price for a 3-cylinder, say a 3-cylinder Yanmar diesel, repower right now is about $13,000 for the engine and 40 hours of labor at $151 an hour. So it's worth it to pay the few extra bucks and get the proper filter for it. Any questions on fuel? Yes, Tim.
Most diesels today, they're set up that way. Do you ever see, Mark, a pump in between the tank and that fuel lead pump?
Okay, the question is, oh, go ahead.
Fuel pump?
Okay, yeah, he's asking, most are set up this way, but do I ever see an electric or another pump in between here? Sometimes I do. Sometimes people have taken where, this is nothing you'll ever find from a factory, however, somebody has done work themselves. Sometimes this will wear out and people will actually put an electric fuel pump in there. That works, but then whatever that fuel pump is has to be a higher pressure than what this is rated at, or otherwise it's not going to move the fuel anywhere. But I have seen people do it, yes.
Because I had to add one because my motor wasn't getting enough fuel. It kept dying out. It would start and just boom, boom, boom. So I put in the electric pump and I had no problem.
Okay, and that's what I said. People have done that and it does work in that instance. Your fuel, speaking of, when you travel around, you should buy your fuel at a reputable yard. If you're out somewhere on the lake and you're getting low on fuel, you want to kind of observe and see if several people are using this dock or not. I had an instance last summer where one of my customers did the Mac race, and then he was on his way back from the Mac race and he stopped over in Michigan somewhere to get fuel, and then he couldn't get his engine running and he brought it here. And so we were trying to figure, so what was happening was his engine would start, it would run for a little while, and then it would die out like it was airbound, like it had air in the system. But it didn't, because if you left it set, it would start and run again for a while. So this went on for a while, so finally I had the technician go out and take a sample of the fuel and bring it into me. He brought it into me, and usually if you do that in a glass jar, you can see if there's separation between diesel fuel and water. There was no separation. I then sniffed it. What happened was he gave somebody a jerry can and asked them to fill it up with diesel, and the kid on the fuel dock didn't fill it with diesel, he filled it with gasoline. So what happens, your explosion point of gasoline is much lower or higher, depending on the way you look at it, than diesel engine fuel is. And so what would happen is it would run for a little bit, but pretty soon it would just vaporize and then the engine would die. So just be careful and make sure you go to a good reputable place and make sure you know what you're putting in your engines. I've also had the same problem happen with people not paying attention on deck. We had somebody, his wife told him to go up topside and fill the water, and he went upstairs and filled the diesel tank with water. Okay? On the flip side of the coin, years and years ago, this is probably 2004, 2005, we had a customer with a Hunter who filled the water tank with diesel. Didn't discover that until he turned the hot shower on. Okay? And that was a mess. We had to replace all those lines. So just take caution. I mean, it's nothing, like I say, you can't walk home from the lake. I refer that because lots of times I refer automobile versus boat because you're all familiar with autos because you drive them every day. So, yes, sir, you had a question?
Yeah, so when you're on a sailboat, when you're heeling, motor sailing, it usually happens on my boat at least, like that I suck up the air from the tank, like just because of heeling. And if the tank is not 100% full, which is never, so is there any?
Okay, his question, yeah, I got you. So his question or comment is he never has a full tank, so when he heels over while he's motor sailing or whatever, he ends up getting air. There should be baffles in your tank that should help prevent that from happening. The other thing would be to have a little more fuel in there. Yeah, the pickup is usually, it's not usually like this. Usually your pickup is here and it goes to the bottom of the tank. It doesn't go all the way to the bottom. It stays about a ½ inch off of the bottom of the tank. So if there's any sediment in the bottom of the tank, it won't suck that up. And so based on where that is and where you heel, that's really something that when they designed the boat, they should have took into consideration for healing and made sure there was both baffles in the tank. And the tank was positioned so that that pickup would be either to the front or the back. Because if it's to one side or the other, you heel over, that's going to happen. I'll get you in a second. Another thing when I was talking about changing the filters, I gave you some ideas. Another thing I do is I always carry a jug. I know it looks like oil, but if you read it says mark and it says diesel on it. I've written what's in here. When you empty your filters, if you can, on Perkins diesels and some universals, it's hard to do because it's a 3-piece filter, but if it's a 1-piece filter like this, or the Raycor filter that you're screwing on, once you change that, take some diesel and fill it up as high as you can without splashing and making a mess all over your boat, and screw it on. That'll make it easier for preparing your boat to run again, which I'll go ahead and cover that after I answer these questions. You have one, ma'am? Okay, her question was she never uses all of her fuel, and what would be the procedure for that? As long as if you don't use all your fuel, that's fine. Make sure you put a stabilizer and additive in it when you pull out in the fall so that it doesn't go bad. We've had some boats that have sat out here in the brokerage area for up to 3 to 4 years that were properly stabilized. We put them back in the water and they fire right up without a problem. Tim, you had a question?
The fuel pump I put in there, is it costing you to pump too much fuel into the motor?
Okay, the question is the pump he put in there, remember he's the gentleman that put a pump in line right here, is it possible to pump too much fuel to the engine? No. You should be careful of what your clamps and what your hoses, everything is rated for. Usually you're not going to find an inline pump that runs more than 7 psi. But what happens is that is very low compared to what this injection pump is. This injection pump gets up to 200 to 300 psi, shooting it to the injectors. That's how it's able to go through very small orifices and cause that fine atomized mist. So there's a good chance, no, you're not going to hurt anything by having that.
Is there a bypass line or anything that shoots the fuel, the excess fuel back to the tank?
There is, yes. I'll get to that. So he asked, is there an access line? So on a gas engine like your atomic force, you put the throttle down and every bit of fuel that's going to it is going to go through that carburetor and keep that engine running. That's how you get speed up higher and higher. On a diesel engine, it only uses as much as necessary to produce the horsepower for where your throttle's at. So any fuel that's not used usually goes through the top of the injectors and goes back and returns to the tank. This is why diesels are way more efficient than gas engines are. Now, some of them are plumbed from here, instead of going back to here. Some of them, whatever they don't use here, go back into the inlet side of the secondary fuel filter.
And the gas tank and the gases issues with supplying. I think my Yanmar manual says you clean the gas tank out every 5 years. Never done that.
Okay.
If you're getting local gas and you just top it off and
Right.
stabilize it every year,
Okay.
how often should you do it?
I'm glad you asked that. So his question was, he's a good guy because he reads his manual, first off. And second off, it says that every 5 years or so you should be cleaning your gas or your fuel because, the issues with the tank. Once again, that every 5 years is based on 365 days a year, 24/7 in the water being used. For us, I don't really have a recommendation of when you should do it, but you keep an eye on it. You have filters on there. When you change your filters, you have your filters changed. Our technicians are trained and they know. If they see something in the filter that they think is abnormal, they'll say, we had this. Now that may be your filter just doing its job, or you may have something in your tank. But that's usually an indication that we say, we'll recommend to you, or if you're going to do it yourself, you see a lot of stuff in there, in that primary fuel filter. If you see stuff in there, then you may want to take a sample off the bottom of your tank. And if you see stuff from the sample in the bottom of the tank, then you would clean it. So we have another thing we do called fuel polishing. And fuel polishing doesn't just clean the fuel, it also cleans the tank. And we put an additive in the tank, it's called AFC 705. And what that does is breaks down any dirt or algae that's around the walls of the fuel tank, and it will suspend it within the fuel. And then we cycle that through several times. And that cleans not only the fuel, but the fuel tank. Because otherwise, if you got crap in your tank, and you empty your fuel, and you put fuel back in it, you're just putting fuel back in a dirty tank. Okay. Any other questions? Good questions, though. Thank you very much. So this just tells a little bit about fuel injection, and I'll leave it up there for a minute just so you guys can see. It just shows, basically how it's timed, as I was telling you, and how things work. While you're looking at that, if you want to take notes with it, back to this. So now I've poured my fuel in here, and I've screwed this back on. There's a gasket in here. Make sure the gasket is on there. More importantly, make sure when you take it off, a gasket comes off with it. Because I'm here to tell you from experience, a gasket on a gasket does not make a seal, and it makes a huge mess in the boat. Okay? So anyways, make sure it's off. Now, the gasket that goes on here, I will typically pull my dipstick out. I'll take a little bit of oil off of my dipstick and rub it on the gasket. That way you're not putting dry rubber right against the metal. I've gone to some boats to take oil filters or fuel filters off, and you're not sure who put them on, but I've gone as far as having to pound screwdrivers through them and twist them to get them off. There are several different wrenches you can use for oil filters and fuel filters. I own this type. I've found it to be good. It goes to different sizes. They have the conventional ones you see on cars that you put on and they tighten up, but a wrench is great for taking your filter off. You do not need a wrench to put your filter back on. Okay, that rubber gasket that's in there is thick enough that it'll make a seal the way it's supposed to. So now you've screwed this on here. If you have an electrical pump after this, some people have done their own brake lines and stuff, and brakes, when you bleed them, you gotta open a screw and you pump them up, and then you open a screw and bleed the air off, and then you go back and pump them up again. A diesel engine's not like that, and a lot of people get confused on that. Diesel engine needs to be a continuous run of fuel to run. So there's a bleeder screw. On this one it's here. It's in different areas. Your owner's manual will show you where your bleeder screw is. You open this up, crack it a bit. Once again, I use the rags all the time, and I usually put something under it, but I put a rag underneath here. I don't have my wrench with me, but then on this particular model, we have a hand pump right here. And so if I pump this, I would pump it until all the bubbles stopped coming out up at the top here. Okay? And you'll have a solid flow of fuel. You're catching it with your rag or with your baggie underneath there. And once there's no fuel coming out, then you tighten that down and you should be good. Your engine's not airbound because the only place you've injected air in is at your filters. If you have you've changed both your filters, your primary one that's not on here, but it's like your Raycor or whatever, you have to bleed the air from there all the way through. A lot of people don't know this, but on a Raycor, there's a little knurled knob on the top of it. That's actually a pump. People think it's just a vent. It's not. You unscrew that, you can pump it up and down. But unless you have a valve or have a connection open, you're doing no good. You have to let the air escape. So once the air has escaped, you close it down. Then we go up topside. I give it full throttle. Start the engine. It'll start up, and then I just slowly bring the throttle down. The reason I'm giving it full throttle is it's saying, give me all the fuel you got. That way, if there's a minuscule air bubble in there, it'll pass by. And you'll know this because you'll start your engine, it'll start to run, and you got it kind of runs up and down like that. You keep it at full throttle, and you'll know it's not going to run away, it's not going to scream away on you, but you'll know when it's running smooth because it'll just start running higher and higher and higher, and you just slowly bring it back. So I've been quite successful with that procedure. Any other? Yes, sir.
So you're not bleeding from the pump to the injectors, or that's not necessarily? Or,
Okay.
Or you assume there is a fuel in it?
Okay. He said, so I'm not bleeding all the way to the injectors, and am I assuming that there's fuel in there? So if I've removed the final fuel filter, that's the furthest area that I'm going to get fuel or air in the system because I haven't broken anything loose from there down. Okay, so with that said, that's why I fill up to that point and bleed it at that point. Here's just another picture of how things go. I sometimes get ahead of myself. See, here's my suggested tips. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, the top of that fuel filter, so you back it off and you can pump it up. All pieces, like the Beta?
No. If you have a Raycor fuel filter as your primary fuel filter, and you break it loose at the farthest point of where you injected air into it, yes, you can pump it, and then you screw it and tighten it back down. It's the Raycor filter, which doesn't come from the engine manufacturer. Your primary filter comes from your boat manufacturer. So what I've learned is a lot of them use Raycor because that's a very easy filter to find. You can get it just about anywhere and it works really good. However, boat manufacturers buy any of the components they're putting in a boat in bulk. So whatever they have the most of, that's what they're going to use.
Mark, just
Yes,
to clarify, the Raycor is also a fuel water separator, right?
Okay, yes, his question is the Raycor is also a fuel water separator. Yes, it is. It's your primary filter and has a bigger micron holes or passages through it, but it's also got paper filament in there that will absorb the water as well. Yes. Some of the rake coolers have a bowl on the bottom where you can see, and there's a drain that you can actually drain the water off of if you get water. So, yeah, your system does not like water. Obviously, it's not fuel, it's not going to run, but you have to remember, your diesel fuel doesn't just make your engine run, it's also a lubricant for all those integral parts that are in there. So if you get water in there, then you start getting rusting. Yes, sir, you had a question?
Do you replace both filters in one year?
Yeah, his question is, do we replace both the, yes, if you fill out a fall decommissioning order and you request fuel filters, we'll change any filter we find in there, yes. Recommend you do them at the same time. Another recommendation, because you may not remember, but we have our techs write the date and their initials on when they changed it. That way we know for sure it was changed and we know when it was changed. If, God forbid, something were to happen to one of you and they needed to sell the boat, they would want to know that. If they have no maintenance records, at least they can look at that. Or if a repair person's going in there to work on something, and you're not around and they can't get a hold of you, then they can look at that and see when that's happening. Okay? I shouldn't have had that slide in. It is important that people know, and that's a different seminar I do on bleeding the fuel system, but I'll go through it briefly while I'm here, since the slide is in here. So, your question earlier about bleeding down to the injection pump. Now, if you run out of fuel, it's a whole different story. Because the furthest place at which you can bleed the air out of your fuel system, manually, by hand, or by turning on a key if it's an electric pump, is at this final fuel filter. Actually, it's at the inlet of the injection pump right here. Okay? After that, this injection pump runs off of the cam on the engine, so the engine needs to be turning over in order to make that fuel pump work, that high pressure pump. So if you run out of fuel completely, you have injections. Let me go back a picture too so I can explain this to you. So you have your fuel line that comes in, and on this one it's this way, but most injectors it's on the top is where your fuel goes in. So what you would need to do is break each one of these loose. I can tell you 99.9% of the engines that I have ever bled fuel injectors on, it's a number 17 wrench. So that's good to know. That's something you should keep with you. But what you do is you break each one of the injector lines loose where it goes into the injectors. You then take your rags and you feed it in between here. And you need to turn your engine over so that you can get fuel through these injection lines and get the air out of them. Now, if we're turning our engine over and our engine's not starting, we're still sucking water in for the cooling, which we're going to discuss in another section. And if the water has no exhaust to blow it out of the back of the boat, then you can end up filling your cylinder with fuel, or with water rather. Which isn't good because it's designed to compress air, not liquid. When it compresses liquid, stuff on the lower end starts breaking. We don't want that. So, turn your seacock off. It's very simple. Close the valve so that it can't suck water in. Once you've turned it over, and you don't want to go more than about 30 seconds at a time because you don't want to overheat your starter neither. Cranking it over, crank it over, crank it over. Go down and check. If you're by yourself, go down and check. Once this rag is saturated at each point, then you tighten the injectors down, open your seacock, and then take it up to full throttle like I said. That's something that is great knowledge to have, but until you've actually done it or worked with it a couple times, you're not sure of how it's going to go. But that is the basic bleeding your fuel system when it's completely airbound.
Mark?
Yes.
You open all the injectors at once, or
Yes, Peter asked, do you open all the injectors at once? Yes, you open them all at once. Because you got a lot of pressure there, you may end up getting an engine, maybe it was only airbound on one cylinder, and the rest of them are okay. Next thing you know, you got an injector, you got an engine running on 3 cylinders, throwing high pressure fuel all over the place because you have one open. So open them all, that way it won't start until you close them all back up. I'm doing my glasses.
Over here.
Sorry about that. It's your fault for asking me about my birthday earlier. I'm going to skip through that because it's a different part. So, lubrication system. So, you want to keep your diesel clean and your filters. Once again, this is just a little slide to show a difference. Now, I'm here to tell you, I was asking about the engines, and if has anybody that's wandered in since I started got a Perkins diesel back there? Oh, okay. Well, most of your Perkins and some of your Universals, you can change your oil and it still looks exactly like it does on the right-hand side. It'll still look dark. It just has to do with the compression ratio in the engines and the tolerances in the engines, how much carbon blows back. It doesn't mean it's bad, but you should, a lot of people, if that happens, they'll do 2 oil changes. Nothing wrong with doing that neither. I love this slide. So it doesn't just make your parts slippery. You see you got lubrication by providing a film between the moving parts. So in the beginning I showed you how the piston was going up and down. The piston has rings on it that are basically spring-loaded. They go out to the outside of the cylinder. But you still don't have metal riding on metal because if you did, it would wear out like pretty quick as much as this diesel runs. It may look like it's touching, but there's a very fine film of oil between those. It provides the slipperiness of it. And you'll see also the sealing. It cleans components. It's also used for your cooling components. So make sure you're using the right oil that's designed for your engine. Biggest question I get is, can I use synthetic oil? You can use what you want. Once again, go back to your owner's manual. Every diesel is different, especially if you're new and you're still in warranty. Use what they're recommending. Just recently have they started recommending some synthetic oils for some of the engines, but mostly they recommend either a 15, 40, or 30 weight, depending on your engine. By the way, we are filming this, so if you need to go back and look at notes that you missed, and the slides will be on there as well, just in case you don't keep up with something or you missed something. So here's the path that our oil takes. All the way down on the bottom, we have an oil pump. Once the engine starts rotating oil over, the oil pump runs off of the gear, goes through your filter, and then it starts going through all of your passages. And it works its way all the way to the top, and then it drains itself back down to the sump. When you check your oil, especially like on this one, they're not all this way. Not picking on you, Spencer, but some of the Westerbeeks just don't have this rubber stopper on them. They just have it, just sits back down over it. If you're checking your oil and it has a rubber stopper similar to this one, you want to put it in, push it down. You want to wait, I don't know, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, because this rubber now caused a bubble, an air bubble that could have been in here, and you get a false reading. When you pull it out, excuse me, you check it, you got a high line and a low line. As long as you're between the lines, you're okay. If it's below the full line, it doesn't mean you're low on oil. That is the safe operating level. That's because, like you were talking about with the fuel, your boat heels both ways. That is a safe operating level, so you're okay there. Once you get below that, then you want to add some. But the right way to do it is pull it out, wipe it off, put it down. If it's got the rubber stopper, wait a few seconds rather. Pull it back out and check it, and then put it back in. The oil filter, usually mounted, almost always mounted sideways on an engine. So you'd think the front of this engine was difficult to get to. Now you're climbing through the galley sink trying to get to this on some boats. It's not easy to get to. Once again, I do the same thing, the same trick with the bag and the rags, and I get it under there the best I can. You want to run your engine before you change your oil. Why do you want to do this? Take a glass of water, pour dirt in it, and leave it sit. Where's the dirt going to sit? In the bottom of the engine. So you start the engine, you warm it up. Now the dirt mixes with the oil. The viscosity gets thinner, meaning the oil is hot or warm, so it's easier to work with. And then most of the times you suck it out of the dipstick hole with a pump, and now you're extracting both the dirt and the oil that's in there. Okay? Same with the oil filter. I recommend you write your initials on it, the date you changed it, that way you just know. And the same with while you're changing the oil, make sure you put some oil around the rim of that. And just like the fuel filter, every 100 hours or once a season, preferably in the fall. Because if we do this in the fall, after we've changed our oil, you do not want to winterize your engine until you've changed your oil. Now you have to start the engine to run antifreeze through it to winterize it. So if you do this, now you have good clean oil sitting on all those slippery, vital parts of your engine that's going to be in layup for several months. Make sure you get the specified oil filter from the manufacturer. The oil filters have a relief valve built into them. If they were to clog at a certain pressure, oil would relieve, go past the filter, and still get to all the vital parts of your engine. If you just go buy a Napa filter, it might have a different setting in it, and that could cause catastrophic failure to your engine. So, here's another good slide that just kind of shows, I was telling you about where it comes from the fuel pump, or the oil pump rather, and it just shows all the different places that it goes and drops down and drains back over top of. This is just telling us about the types of oil to use. Once again, it will say in your manufacturers which one to use. Yanmar, of course, recommends the genuine ones. That's why I said in the very beginning it's important that you write down what your engine, what your model number is, maybe sometimes your serial number, so you can get these. It's not a bad idea. We have a few customers, we got some at the long table back there as a matter of fact, that have, they keep a kit on their boat with a spare oil filter, spare belt, spare fuel filter. And each year when they have us do the maintenance for them, we use what was in their kit. They had it in their kit in the event of emergency and they needed it over the summer. But if they didn't use it, then each year we take it from their kit, do their maintenance, and resupply their kit with the new stuff. So it's a good idea to do something like that as well. Sorry for the honorable mention, Paul. So here's where I was talking about only use oil filters recommended by the engine manufacturer for obvious reasons. Yes, sir?
What about transmission oil?
Okay. Question was, what about transmission oil? Transmission oil, usually on the sailboat engines, on big power boats, you'll have filters, you'll want to change those as well. But on the transmission, it's every 200 hours for the oil, or every 2 years. And the reason being is the transmissions do not get, they're not injected, or how should I say that? They don't come in contact with like exhaust gases and stuff like your diesel engine does. And it's just oil splashing around in there. So on yours, well, no, on hers,
Right.
the oil for the engine and the transmission are the same sum. On an atomic 4 engine, it's the same oil.
The same one. I have a Yanmar.
Okay, on your
3GM.
Okay, 3GM probably with a 2 kmp transmission on it.
You drain it from the bottom or
No,
you suck
you,
it out?
you suck it out of the top. That's a good point. I don't have a transmission on an engine, so I can't show you. But that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. On the transmissions, especially on the Yanmars, the dipstick usually screws in. You unscrew it. Be careful. There's an O-ring on it. That O-ring needs to stay on it.
Right.
It'll fall off easy if you're not careful. You wipe it off. You set it in there. You don't screw it back down to check the level. You just set it there. That's the way it's designed on the Yanmars. Like I said, read your owner's book and it'll tell you. But a lot of the boats are that way. You set it there. If you end up screwing it down in there to check it, then you might think that you're low and you end up overfilling your sump. So the idea is to just set it there for checking the oil.
And
Yes.
what oil would you use on that? Same as the engine, the
Okay?
30 weight?
I keep saying you go to your owner's manuals and you have to do that. Every engine is different, every manufacturer is different. I'm not going to recommend without knowing and not having a manual in front of me. On a Yanmar diesel,
I think it's 30.
hang on, it's not the same on all Yanmars.
Okay.
Let me tell you this. On the bell housing where the transmission is, there's a square sticker about like this.
Yeah.
And it'll say 20/30 or 1540. It'll tell you what transmission oil you use. It's specifically stamped into the engine. Yes, sir.
Is there a filter in the trans?
Okay, he asked, is there a filter on the transmission? That's what I was mentioning earlier. On most of your sailboats, no. On bigger power boats, that run much higher RPM, yes. But usually not on the sailboats. Yes, sir.
What's your recommended method of getting the oil or the gearbox?
Okay, my recommended method for extracting the oil from the gearbox is the same as with the engine. Some sort of vacuum pump, either a 12-volt DC pump or a handheld vacuum pump. You pull the dipstick out, you get to the bottom of it, and you suck it out. Extract it. And then
The hand ones work okay, or?
hand ones work perfectly fine, yeah. There's several of them that work really well. Okay. Cooling systems. This is a big one I like to use for describing. You'll see here, automotive uses air over water for cooling. Marine uses water, either direct water or water over water. So when we refer to an engine, we refer to it as being either raw water cooled or freshwater cooled. If it is freshwater cooled, that means there is antifreeze, just like a radiator in your car, in your boat. Only in a boat, instead of being called a radiator, it's called a heat exchanger. And so what happens is raw water is sucked in from the bottom of the boat, and it goes through a heat exchanger, or a cooler if you will. It goes through passages, and are flowing around those passages, so it would be tubes. I don't have one out here. It would be tubes, but then your oil would flow around that. So indirectly, your antifreeze or your oil would be cooled by the water. So, with that said, same thing. We have a seacock, and this is an older slide, so I've left it out purposely. You should have, between your seacock and your raw water pump, a strainer of some sort. Boats nowadays are always built with sea strainers in there. If you own or buy an older boat, there's a good chance you might not have a strainer in there. If you don't have one, I recommend you put one in there. Okay, because that will save any seaweed or unfortunately nowadays we have a lot of people who like to let balloons loose and they always land over top of the lake for some reason. And then they go under your boat, they get sucked up into your strainer and clog up your pump. You have no cooling. So it's important to have a strainer in there. Okay, and then you have inside your raw water pump, there's an impeller. And then here's what I was just talking about a few minutes ago. This would be a heat exchanger. The water would flow through the tubes, the antifreeze would flow around the outside, and then go to all the integral parts of your engine that is cooling. The impellers, if you store outside and winterize the boat by means of displacing water with antifreeze, then I recommend every 2 years you look at changing your impeller. If you store inside heated and you do not winterize your boat, I recommend you look at it every year. Reason being, inside that impeller pump, it's round, but then it's got a flat spot, and that's a rubber impeller that's in there, and that flat spot, while you turn it around, is what actually causes the suction and pushes it. If you're winterizing by means of antifreeze, you're leaving antifreeze in there, and the antifreeze will keep that rubber resilient so that it works like it's supposed to. And if you're storing inside heated and you're not winterizing, there's nothing to keep that from taking a set and staying like that, and then it may become not properly functional in the spring. I have several customers that are in heated buildings that will actually remove their impellers and leave them sit out for the winter. So, something you definitely want to check. Now this is very important, whether you're, yes Tim?
With the impeller, this is the more Great Lakes or freshwater maintenance code. What about saltwater? How often would you replace that now?
Okay, if you're in salt water, how often would you change it? You have to look at the recommended manufacturers based on salt water, but you would also usually have something in there to help, like flushing something, so you could flush it each time so it didn't have salt water. In other words, for your cooling, I see a lot of people in their cooling systems, they have a valve, like a three-way valve right here, and what they'll do is close off the seacock and open the other one and hook a hose or hook it to a water source to flush it out so you don't have salt water.
You do that daily? When they come back?
Yeah, I would do it daily if I was in salt water, definitely. We drive around here in the winter, look what our vehicles look like with salt. Can you imagine what the inside of the engine you can't see looks like? I would do it daily. So where was I at here? Oh, the impeller. When you change it, if you're doing it, or if a repair facility is changing it, and say if they change it, have them always leave the spare for you, the impeller for you. Because in the event of an emergency, you suck up that balloon out on the lake, you've at least got something to move some water, right? However, if they remove that, or you remove that, and there's pieces missing, you want to know where those pieces are. Reason being, it's rubber. Eventually, rubber will get clogged in these tubes. If rubber gets clogged in these tubes, the amount of water that's supposed to flow through there can no longer flow through there, and you loosen, or you lose the cooling effect that the raw water is having on your engine. So, I make sure that all of our techs, if we ever change an impeller, we take a baggie and we either leave the impeller sitting in a baggie for the customer somewhere down in the boat, or if there's one that's missing, we put the impeller there, we find all of the missing parts and put them in the bag too. Let me see if I got that slide in here. There you go. That's what I was referring to. That's kind of a close-up of what ends up happening. They get clogged. So we had a customer who said, came in and said, I'm overheating, I don't know what's wrong. I've had my impeller changed 3 times, it keeps eating up impellers, I don't know what's going on with it. So we started to, let me go back the other way. So once your engine is all cooled, the water goes through a mixing elbow. Just like on here, a mixing elbow, and it goes out your exhaust. Reason being, you drive down the road, you hit a mud puddle with your exhaust, you see how it steams? That's a hot exhaust pipe under there because you got all those hot exhaust gases coming out of that engine, right? On a boat, you don't have that capability. You have an engine mounted halfway through the boat, and then you have a little muffler, and then you've got a rubber hose that comes the whole length of it and exits out the boat. So if you have hot exhaust gases going through rubber hose, you're going to melt the rubber hose. You're going to do 2 things. You're going to fill your boat with carbon monoxide. The other thing you're going to do is flood your boat, because water is supposed to go through this. It injects in this mixing elbow, and then it goes out the back of the boat. That's the reason every time you start your boat, you should look over the back or the side of the boat, wherever your exhaust is, and make sure water's coming out, because that's the other thing that the water is doing. Yes, Tim?
Yeah, that mixing elbow, is it also known as a Y pipe? Is a Y pipe something different?
Okay, he asked if the mixing elbow is also known as a Y pipe. People have said a Y pipe, yes. But what it is, and you'll be able to come up, you guys can look in this when we're done, but what there is there's basically a pipe inside a pipe. So the exhaust comes through the inside, and then around the outside is where the water goes. So the water mixes around this. If they came in contact with each other, when you shut the engine off, anything that's left could go back into the engine and take the least path of resistance, which is probably going to be through an open exhaust valve, fill the cylinder with water. Once again, the cylinder is not designed to compress water, it's designed to make compression with air. So you got to be careful with that, yes.
I had to install a light pipe because my motor was so low in the boat that once I turned it off, it kept taking water and it flowed through the whole engine and then filled up my cylinders and filled up the exhaust.
Okay, so he was mentioning he had to install a Y pipe. Lots of times, that's the reason you'll see the exhaust is down here and the water injects up here, because it actually, it goes out. See, this is kind of not a good drawing of it, but most of them will go up like this. You'll see that on there. It rises up. So the exhaust goes down and then the water goes with it. Anyway, so with that mixing elbow, you now have hot exhaust gases and cold raw water going through it. Annually, you should inspect it, have it inspected, okay? Because you get calcium buildup, you can get rust buildup, several different things happen. I'm not sorry, not annually, biannually you should pull it off. And just check in there and make sure, because what happens if that clogs up, puts excessive back pressure on the engine, and your engine won't perform the way it's designed. Yes, Tim, what were you going to say?
Yeah, the light pipe I installed was in the front of the motor, and it was underneath, obviously, the heat exchanger. But what I did is I had to run it up, and I think I'm above the water line outside the boat.
Yeah,
To stop
okay.
that from filling. Then it came back down and followed its natural course. But it
Okay.
was, the hose I took off was only like 4 inches long. But now I had this big old like 2.5.
So what he's mentioning is the Y pipe he had installed for his specific design was towards the front of the engine. It had to go up above the water line and come back down. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of your boats, and you'll see, so the engine sits down low, usually in the center near the belly of the boat. Then you have your exhaust. All of your exhaust hoses go up and then come back down before they let out. That's for 2 reasons. One, it needs to be above the water line at some point, and you have a water separating muffler in there as well. But 2 is it comes back down like that. So when you're traveling along and then you stop or put your brakes on, you know how when you just come from throttling along, of course you guys are all sailboaters, but anyways, when you stop, you know the rush of water that comes up behind the boat, that'll stop it from going back in the exhaust and back to the engine. Yes, sir. Do we ever put check valves in after the elbow? No, I have never put one in. If it's plumbed properly, you have no use for a check valve after the elbow. Yes.
What about your muffler?
What about it?
Should we replace it every now and then?
Okay, he's asking about the water muffler. Should we replace it every once in a while? No. Keep an eye on it. Most of them now are made of either polycarbon or harder plastic.
Yeah.
And what that does is the exhaust comes out of the engine and goes into a muffler, a water muffler if you will, where it mixes with water and then that's when it shoots out the back of the boat. So, what you were just asking me, George, about the check valve, the way these mufflers are designed, the water will go in and it'll go almost all the way to the bottom. And then you got about that much room, and then it's wide open where it goes to come out the back of the boat. So there's very little chance of anything coming back up the length of that muffler. If you have a steel muffler, keep an eye on it. If it starts leaking, by all means, replace it. But I've never had an instance where we've just periodically changed one just because. Now, your antifreeze. Hang on a minute, I skipped something. Let me go. Remember that guy I told you that was overheating time after time after time? Finally, we pulled the cap off of his cooler. And this is what he found. The time we replaced it, this was the impeller we pulled out. So now you see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got about 6 vanes missing off of this impeller. And there's a whole lot more than 6 vanes stuck in the end of that cap. So not only was its heat exchanger clogged, but this was clogged. Okay, so Mark, if this happens, how do I get my pieces of my impeller? What we would typically do, this is a unique engine because the water pumps are on the other side. Most of your smaller sailboat engines, you have a raw water pump right down here. You take the hose off that goes from the discharge of the pump where it discharges to the engine. You take the hose off where it hooks into the mixing elbow right here. You either use air or a garden hose and you force water backwards through the system. Anything that's in there will usually come out of that hose right there. Once again, I use a bag. I usually poke a few holes in it so it doesn't all fill up with water, but not big holes. I've gone as far as I carry I know it sounds funny, but I carry a little colander strainer with me. Reason being, you want to catch them pieces so that I can know that I got them. I can give them to my customers so they have peace of mind knowing that we've done what we said we were going to do or found what we found. For yourself, it's just good peace of mind to know. Because I can guarantee you, if you don't put something under there and catch it, there's probably about a 95% chance a lot of stuff's going to come out of there, but you're never going to find it because once it hits the bilge, it's gone. It should be right in front of you, but when you get down there, it's gone. Some reason. Maintenance schedule. Definitely recommend you have a maintenance schedule and follow it the best you can. This is just one design. A lot of times in your owner's manual, it will give you a schedule to follow. Once again, I also said in your owner's manual, it refers to your boat being in the water 24/7, 365 days a year. What I've told you is not a written law, it's simply a practice that we follow based on boats being in the Great Lakes. So, you know, if you're gonna quote me on that, know that it's what we've used and what has been successful for us. And that's the only thing, you know, I like to pass along. Are there any other questions?
Antifreeze. When should you change it?
Okay, that's a good question too. Antifreeze, when should you change your antifreeze? Well, you look at your owner's manual and I'll tell you why. Because a few years back, it's probably more than a few now, time's getting away from me, it was about 7, 8 years ago, we had a customer that had a new boat. It was only 2 years old. And we put what Yanmar came out with that called extended life antifreeze in the boat. And then we had a problem with the engine, and it was because of the antifreeze. And because we did not change the antifreeze annually, as the owner's manual said, they did not cover the warranty, even though I was using Yanmar's extended life antifreeze. So it's kind of a catch-22. That's why I stress so much to read your owner's manual. I don't, as far as a recommendation, what I would do, based on where we're at here, I recommend every 2 to 3 years, change out your antifreeze. It does break down, you know, over time as you use it. It's chemical, and anytime it warms and gets cold, it breaks down a little by little.
What would you do, drain the tank and then top that tank back up? How you gonna get it out of motor? How you gonna get it out of motor, the antifreeze?
Okay, the engine, the motor is electric. Just teasing. Okay, so how do you get the antifreeze out? Okay, that's another great question. I appreciate that. On this particular engine, on a lot of your engines, there is a fitting right down here that unscrews, and it's on the other side too, or you would go to the lowest point, which would be where it comes out of the pump down here. And you would just take the hose clamp off, and you would have to try to catch it in a bucket. Something to keep in mind if you are changing your antifreeze, you can't just open this up and suck it out like you do your engine, or your oil, okay? Reason being, this is just a reservoir and a heat exchanger, because as it's cycling through, it passes through this. You have it in this hose, you have it in this hose, you have it in your block, and you have it on the other side of your thermostat. So if you're sucking out of there, you're only going to go to the top side of your thermostat. The thermostat doesn't open until it reaches 160 or 180 degrees, and that's where it goes through and goes through the rest of the block. There are block drains on all engines, and that's what I would recommend. However, since you asked that, don't just open the block drain and start draining it, and then when it's empty, you think it's done. It's in a vacuum. You got to open this. If you're draining something out, you have to let air in. So make sure you open this when you open your block drain to drain your antifreeze. Okay? Any other questions?
And once you start filling it up, do you have to worry about any air trap?
Okay, good question. Do you have to worry about any air trap once you start filling it? Yes and no. The reason I say that is, if a lot of boats have a water jacket loop on their water heater. So you have your water heater that has your raw water, and you also have, or that has your potable water, and it runs off of electric, but you also have a loop. So what happens is you start your engine, and there's a hose that comes off. It would be underneath these 2 screws on this engine. This doesn't have it. But what would happen was it would send water, and it goes in a loop around the water heater on the outside of it, and then back to the engine. That way, when you're underway, you can have hot water as well. Now, when you start once you put antifreeze in and you start your engine, after running for a few minutes, both of these hoses should be equally as warm as one another. I mean, you're not going to tell the difference, even though it's taking the heat, or, you know, taking the coolness out of the water and heating it up. They're both going to be warm. If one of them is warm and one of them is cold, pretty soon your engine's going to overheat because there's an air bubble This is a centrifugal pump. It's designed to push, not suck water. So it pushes. So if there's an air bubble, it won't push past it. Okay? So usually what you have to do is either break a hose loose and bleed the air out of it, being the colder one, or lots of times on top of the thermostat, people will put a pet cotton valve here, and you open that until the air bleeds out. That's about the only time you get air in it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to worry about it. No. You would run it for a little while with the cap off,
Right.
because it is going to refill your hoses, and then you would just top it off.
Right.
Okay? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
On the antifreeze, is there any particular type?
Owner's manual.
Manufacturer?
Owner's manual. You gotta look at what the owner's manual recommends, okay? I'm sorry to keep saying that, but I can't be liable for 7 different types of engines, okay?
Right.
There are several different types you can use. Look at your owner's manual and see what it says to use. You had a question?
Going back to the impeller, I'm experiencing that right now. We were talking about it the other day, Mark. But so I've taken off that cover of the heat exchanger. I kind of thought it'd be.
Right.
I took off, changed the impeller. It's missing a vein. I can't find it. It seems like that hose is clear. Took off the manifold. I kind of figured I'd find it between the heat exchanger going and all those tubes. I can't find it.
Okay.
They look clear. If it got past that, it got through to the mixing valve.
Okay, that's a good point.
Am I probably good, or will you?
Yes.
suggest?
So, and I actually know this because I was helping him in the store yesterday, but, so he's missing a fin, and so he was chasing, trying to find that fin. And he's not able to find it, and he went to all the places I suggested he go, okay, to try to get out of there. Just make sure in the pump itself, when you got the cover off the pump, there's like 3 cams, it's called a cam that goes across there. Make sure it's not stuck in there. That's the only other place to be stuck. There is a good chance that it broke off and it disintegrated in there and it went with the water out the back of the boat. There's a good chance that could have happened too.
Then
Yes, sir.
A follow up on that. I know that this is the Yanmar. I don't know if it's particular at all. You start reading the owner's manual. They're very specific about the torque you use to put these bolts back on, and they have like a number code on them. Do I have to go by an expensive torque wrench, or does it really matter?
Okay, his question was, he's reading the owner's manual, which I applaud him, okay? And it says a certain torque for these screws. Me personally, I don't use a torque on them. I can tell you that the screws that hold those covers on are very small. Oftentimes they're brass, and if you over tighten them, they'll snap, and they'll snap easy. Okay? So, yes, sir.
So I have a 1GM no heat exchanger, and I lost one fin. I could not find it. So, any suggestion where to trace it down?
Okay, he has a 1GM, which they no longer make, so you got a dinosaur, but he couldn't find the impeller piece neither. Just the suggestions of the places where I said it would be. Like I said, there's a good chance if you're only missing one impeller piece that it disintegrated and went out the back of the boat with the exhaust. Back there? How do I recommend cleaning a diesel spill? Oh, if you spill it, oh yeah, okay. So if you do spill a diesel, because that happens too, you're unscrewing it, you're trying the best to hold on to it, but man, when it hits that baggie, it drops, and then everything else falls. The best thing I've found for cleaning up diesel in a bilge, you can get it anywhere, you don't have to buy it at Larsen Marine, but Simple Green. That works really good for both cleaning it and it helps deodorize it. It covers up the smell a little bit. But that's been the best thing I've used, and trust me, I've spilled a lot of diesel in 40 years. Okay? You had a question over here somewhere? Nope? Okay, yes.
How often do you change the rubber impeller?
How often do I change what? The impeller?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was saying. If you winterize and you use winterize by means of antifreeze, every 2 years. If you do not winterize your boat using antifreeze and you just leave it sit dry all winter, because some people will just dry drain their stuff, than I recommend annually, because it'll take a set, and then it won't be as effective as it's supposed to be. I have another seminar coming up in 2 weeks, and I've done this one before too, but so I talked about diesel engines today. We had somebody talk about sales earlier. I've got, I think next week I've got the art of anchoring and a winch maintenance seminar lined up. My seminars, I called it several things throughout the years. Safety below the waterline, maintenance systems, whatever you want to call it. I put together a seminar based on all the other components of a boat, like your shaft, your strut, your prop, your through-hull valves, your air conditioner, stuff nobody talks about. So that's in 2 weeks that I'll be doing that one, so encourage you all to come back for that as well. And I thank you for your time and all of the questions. Yes, you got a question, Kevin?
Quick question. What kind of life expectancy do you expect from a diesel that's well-maintained?
Life expectancy of what? I'm sorry, I got a furnace here.
Well-maintained diesel, how many hours?
Okay. Life expectancy of a well-maintained diesel, well over 10,000 hours. I mean, we've got some that have way more than that. But the key is exactly the question he asked, well-maintained. Because I've seen diesel engines last 1,000 hours because somebody didn't maintain them properly. You know, I've got a, you guys are going to laugh and think I'm dorky, but this is another one of my favorite sayings is, preventive maintenance doesn't cost, it pays. People always say, well, what's it going to cost to do that? But it doesn't matter what it costs. Do you want to preserve it? And do you want to have it for many years? Or do you want to come see me and say, Mark, I need a quote for a new engine? I want you to come get me for a new engine, but there's people in here that'll tell you otherwise. Right here? Okay, thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to come up and play with the engine, come on up.
Thank you.